Under the grey skies of County Durham in northern England, a seemingly ordinary November evening in 2011 turned into a tragedy that would haunt the nation for years. 17-year-old Ashley Hall was a bright, cheerful teenager who loved fashion, music, and her friends. She was kind-hearted, with a smile that often lit up the room. And like many young people of her generation, she spent a lot of time on Facebook. It was there, in the endless swirl of friend requests and online conversations, that she encountered someone who appeared to be the perfect young man. His name, at least on the screen, was Peter Cartwright. His profile showed the photo of a handsome young man, stylish, approachable, and around her age. The messages he sent to Ashley were warm, gentle, and filled with affection. He seemed like the kind of person every teenager dreamed of meeting, someone who listened, who cared, and who promised adventure beyond the boredom of school and small-town life. But the reality behind the screen was far darker. Peter Cartwright was a mask. The man behind the profile was Peter Chapman, a 33-year-old sex offender with a history of violence and manipulation. Chapman had been in and out of prison, with a documented record of sexual assaults, attempted kidnappings, and predatory behavior. He was homeless, drifting from one temporary place to another, and he had found in Facebook a new hunting ground, one that gave him anonymity and access to unsuspecting teenagers. By borrowing the photos of a good-looking stranger and weaving a carefully constructed persona, Chapman created the illusion of a trustworthy friend. Ashley, like many young people, was naive about the dangers lurking online. Over weeks of chatting, her guard dropped. She confided in him, laughed at his jokes, and shared pieces of her daily life. To her, it felt like the start of a romance. When he suggested they meet, she hesitated, but eventually agreed, believing she was about to step into a sweet teenage love story. On that fateful day, she told her family she was going to see a friend, but she never came home. The meeting took place in the backstreets near Sedgefield. Instead of the young man from the profile, Ashley was greeted by Chapman himself, older, heavier, with cold, menacing eyes. Before she could fully process the deception, he overpowered her. What followed was brutal and swift. Chapman bound, gagged, and strangled Ashley to death, leaving her lifeless body in a ditch by the roadside. It was a crime of predation, one that stripped away the illusion of digital romance and revealed the horror of misplaced trust. When Ashley failed to return home, her family grew frantic. The police were alerted, and a search began. Within hours, investigators traced her online activity and realized she had been lured by someone she believed was a teenage boy. The breakthrough came quickly. Chapman had left digital footprints linking him to the false account. By the time he was located, it was too late. Ashley's body had already been found, discarded in a field not far from Chapman's temporary residence. The public reaction was explosive. Newspapers splashed her smiling photos across front pages, contrasting them with Chapman's mugshot, the face of a remorseless predator. Parents across the United Kingdom recoiled in horror, realizing how vulnerable their children were in the new age of social media. The idea that a convicted sex offender could so easily create a fake profile, lure a teenager, and carry out such a crime sparked outrage at both the justice system and the platforms that enabled him. The trial that followed was swift. Chapman, faced with overwhelming evidence, pleaded guilty to rape and murder. The court heard chilling details of his past, including the long string of sexual offenses and his manipulation of online identities. The judge sentenced him to life, imprisonment with a minimum of 35 years, ensuring he would spend most of his remaining life behind bars. For Ashley's family, however, no sentence could erase the pain of losing a daughter to such a senseless and cruel act. Beyond the personal grief, the case became a watershed moment for online safety awareness in Britain and beyond. Schools began introducing programs about the dangers of online grooming. Parents were urged to monitor their children's social media use. Facebook, under intense pressure, promised to tighten its safety measures and reporting systems. Advocacy groups pointed out that Ashley's murder was not an isolated incident, but part of a growing trend in which predators exploited the anonymity of the internet to hunt for victims. The phrase Facebook killer entered the public lexicon, not as a reference to social media itself, but as a grim reminder of how easily trust can be weaponized in the digital age. The case resonated globally, with international media highlighting it as one of the first major romance-related crimes to emerge from the online world. It was no longer just about scams or heartbreaks, it was about life and death. Years later, Ashley's story continues to serve as a cautionary tale. Campaigners against online exploitation often invoke her name to stress the importance of digital vigilance. Her murder illustrated the terrifying gap between perception and reality on the internet. A teenager who thought she was meeting a charming boy found herself face to face with a predator who had been hiding behind a stolen smile. In the end, the tragedy of Ashley Hall was not only about one young girl's life cut short. It was about a society struggling to adapt to the rapid rise of online interaction, about a justice system grappling with how to contain repeat offenders, and about families everywhere realizing that the bright blue glow of a Facebook message could conceal unimaginable danger. Her death was a brutal awakening, the moment when the world first truly understood that love on the internet could lead not to romance, but to murder. Tokyo in the early 2000s was a city living between two worlds. On the surface it was neon lights, bustling trains, and cutting-edge technology. But beneath the glow was a society quietly shifting into the new era of digital connection. By 2005, Yahoo Messenger had become one of the most popular platforms for people in Japan to talk, flirt, and explore love beyond the constraints of face-to-face encounters. It was anonymous, exciting, and full of possibilities. For a 32-year-old woman named Yumi Sato, it became an escape from the monotony of her office work and the loneliness of her small apartment in Shinjuku. Yumi had lived a life that to many seemed ordinary. She had a stable clerical job, a circle of friends she saw occasionally, and a family who worried about her but respected her independence. What she longed for, however, was connection, romance, intimacy, and someone who could make her feel special. In the conservative landscape of Japanese dating culture at the time, where social expectations pressed heavily on single women in their 30s, Yumi felt out of place. Yahoo Messenger gave her a chance to step outside those boundaries. It was on the chat platform that she met someone who called himself Kenji. He claimed to be 34, a salaryman in a mid-level trading company, and his messages were crafted to be everything Yumi wanted to hear. He typed late into the night, telling her he admired her maturity, that she was beautiful, that he too felt lonely in the sprawling anonymity of Tokyo. His words were attentive and affectionate, and slowly, Yumi began to feel the pull of something she had not experienced in years, the thrill of being wanted. For months, their chats became the center of her emotional life. She rushed home from work, not to watch television but to open her laptop and see if Kenji was online. They spoke about their dreams, their frustrations, and their imagined future together. Kenji described himself as tall, neatly dressed, a man who took his responsibilities seriously. He said he was tired of shallow relationships and longed for something deeper. He painted pictures of evenings walking along the Sumida River, weekends exploring Kyoto, even the possibility of marriage. Yumi's cautious heart began to believe. When Kenji finally suggested they meet in person, she hesitated, but agreed. The place he proposed was discreet, a love hotel in the heart of Tokyo. Such hotels, though often associated with secrecy, were common in the city, places where couples could meet away from prying eyes. Yumi rationalized the choice. Perhaps he was shy or didn't want to run into colleagues. She told herself this was just part of the excitement. She dressed carefully that day, nervous but hopeful. imagining that behind the hotel doors she would finally step into the romance she had been dreaming of. But the man waiting for her was not Kenji. He was not the polished professional she had seen in her mind, but a disheveled, unemployed 37-year-old with a history of depression and failure. His real name was not Kenji, and his life was far from the fantasy he had woven in their chats. When Yumi walked into the room and saw him, her shock was evident. The illusion collapsed instantly, and in that moment of dissonance, his obsession revealed its darker face. Investigators later pieced together what happened in those final moments. The man had grown increasingly fixated on Yumi during their months of chatting. To him, she was no longer just a woman on the other side of the screen. She was his possession, the anchor for his fragile ego. Faced with the prospect of rejection, humiliation, and exposure, he lashed out with a violence that stunned even seasoned detectives. In the privacy of the Love Hotel, he attacked Yumi with a ferocity born of desperation and rage. She never made it out of the room alive. When Yumi failed to return home that night, her family tried calling her phone, but there was no answer. The following day, hotel staff, concerned after the guest failed to check out, entered the room and found her lifeless body. The scene was brutal. Clear signs of struggle, evidence of strangulation, and the presence of the man who had vanished shortly after the crime. Police quickly traced the perpetrator. His digital fingerprints were all over the Yahoo Messenger account he had used to lure her. Within days, he was arrested. During questioning, he confessed not only to the killing but also to his months of deception. His statements revealed a chilling blend of self-pity and entitlement. He said he could not bear the thought of being rejected, that if she would not love him after all his efforts, then no one else would have her either. It was a rationale drenched in warped logic, but one that laid bare the lethal mix of loneliness, fantasy, and control. The news broke across Japan with the force of an earthquake. Newspapers and television reports called it the Yahoo Messenger love murder. It was not just another crime of passion, it was a crime born out of a new frontier of human interaction, one where the boundaries between reality and fantasy had blurred. Parents worried for their daughters. Young people who had been experimenting with online chat rooms suddenly felt exposed. The idea that someone you trusted through months of nightly conversations could be a complete stranger, even a killer, shocked the nation. Sociologists and commentators dissected the case for weeks. Some pointed to Japan's rising rates of social isolation, the phenomenon of hikikomori, and the growing reliance on online spaces for companionship. Others criticized the lack of awareness about digital deception, noting that people were too quick to trust the words and images on a screen. For women in particular, the case became a chilling reminder of vulnerability in a society that often offered few safe avenues for dating beyond traditional circles. The trial was swift. The killer showed little remorse, alternating between claiming he loved Yumi and insisting he had no choice. The court rejected his pleas, sentencing him to life imprisonment. For Yumi's family, the verdict was cold comfort. They remembered her not as a headline but as a daughter, a sister, a friend whose laughter was gone forever. Years later, the story still lingers in Japan's collective memory. It was one of the first high-profile cases where digital romance ended in murder, long before the rise of modern dating apps. It served as a grim warning about the dangers of trusting too deeply in the illusions created online. For Yumi, the search for love in the bright, endless corridors of Yahoo Messenger ended in darkness, a tragedy that reminded the world that behind every profile can hide a stranger and sometimes a killer. In 2013, America was deeply immersed in the age of webcams and instant video calls. Skype was not just a platform for casual conversations, it was a lifeline for couples separated by distance, a tool that allowed people to believe they could bridge oceans and time zones with the click of a button. For 19-year-old Emily Foster, a bright and hopeful young woman from the Midwest, Skype became the stage on which she believed her greatest love story was unfolding. Emily was a nursing student with dreams of traveling the world. She was outgoing yet sensitive, someone who trusted easily and gave her heart freely. Her friends described her as caring and endlessly optimistic. But in the quiet of her evenings, after classes and part-time work, she often felt the weight of loneliness. That was when she met Ryan, a man who claimed to be a U.S. soldier stationed overseas. His profile photo showed him in uniform, strong and smiling, the kind of man whose life seemed both heroic and romantic. From the first call, Ryan captivated her. His voice was steady, reassuring, with just enough vulnerability to make him seem real. He spoke about the hardships of military life, the long nights in foreign deserts, the isolation of being away from home. He praised Emily for her compassion, telling her she was the kind of woman soldiers dreamed of coming home to. He sent her grainy photos of himself on duty, sometimes with military vehicles or barracks in the background. Emily, unfamiliar with the details of military authenticity, accepted them at face value. Their nightly Skype sessions soon became the highlight of her life. He called her Angel, Sweetheart, and promised that once his deployment ended, they would finally meet. He spoke of marriage, of moving in together, of building a family. To Emily, it felt like destiny. She introduced him, at least virtually, to her closest friends, who were skeptical but kept their doubts quiet so as not to break her happiness. After months of long-distance devotion, Emily decided she no longer wanted to wait. She saved money, told her parents she was visiting a friend, and booked a flight to finally meet the man she had fallen in love with. He told her he would pick her up at a small regional airport outside of town somewhere discreet, he explained, because military rules made his personal life complicated. She believed him. Her excitement was overwhelming. She texted a friend before boarding her plane, "Wish me luck. I'm finally meeting him. This could be forever." But Ryan was not a soldier. His real name was Derek Miller, a 31-year-old unemployed man living in his mother's basement in a small town. He had no career, no uniform, and no war stories, only a stack of stolen images and an endless ability to lie. His life was a cycle of failed jobs, online obsessions, and a desperate need to control. What he craved was not companionship but power, the ability to make someone believe in a fantasy he had spun out of nothing. When Emily walked through the small airport terminal, she expected to see a man in uniform. Instead, she saw Derek, heavier, unshaven, nervously shifting as he waited. For a moment, she thought there had been a mistake. Then he greeted her, and her heart sank. The illusion shattered instantly. What happened next was pieced together from security cameras, witness accounts, and Derek's own eventual confession. Emily confronted him in the parking lot, demanding answers. She accused him of lying, of betraying her trust, of humiliating her. Derek panicked. The life he had constructed online, the only place where he felt important, was crumbling in front of him. In his mind, Emily was not just rejecting him, she was exposing him. He feared she would tell her family, her friends, maybe even the police. His fantasy was collapsing, and with it, his fragile sense of self. Instead of facing the truth, Derek chose violence. In the shadowed corner of the airport lot, he attacked her. Witnesses later recalled hearing a muffled scream before he forced her into his car. Hours later, Emily was found dead on a deserted road just outside of town. She had been strangled, her body discarded as if she were an inconvenience rather than a person he once professed to love. The shock to Emily's family was immeasurable. Her parents had no idea she had traveled to meet someone she had only known online. Her friends were devastated, replaying their conversations and wondering if they should have stopped her. For the small town, the tragedy was incomprehensible. A bright, kind young woman gone, her life stolen in a crime that seemed both senseless and preventable. The investigation quickly led to Derek. His online chats, his Skype calls, and the fake photos he had used were all tied directly to him. When police raided his home, they found dozens of accounts he had created, conversations with other women he had lured, and a laptop filled with stolen military images. He had been living in a fantasy world, preying on vulnerable women for years. Emily, tragically, had been the one who took the leap of faith to meet him in real life. During his trial, Derek showed little remorse. He tried to argue that Emily had provoked him, that he had been overwhelmed, that he never intended to kill her. The jury saw through his excuses. The judge, in sentencing him to life without parole, called him a predator who weaponized deception and destroyed an innocent life. The case became known in the media as the Skype lover's death. Reporters emphasized the eerie juxtaposition between the intimate face-to-face calls Emily had treasured and the horrifying reality of the man behind the screen. Experts weighed in on the growing phenomenon of catfishing, where individuals create fake online identities to lure others into relationships. Emily's story was used in schools and safety campaigns as a tragic example of how quickly online love can turn into real-world danger. For Emily's family, her death was not just a headline but a daily ache. They described her as someone who believed in people, who wanted to heal others, who dreamed of being a nurse. That her trust had been turned against her in such a brutal way was a cruelty that words could barely contain. Even years later, her story remains a cautionary tale. It illustrates the terrifying fragility of trust in the digital age, how the intimacy of a video call, the comfort of a familiar voice, can mask the reality of a stranger's intentions. Emily believed she was stepping into a love story. Instead, she stepped into a nightmare. Her death stands as a reminder that behind the glow of a screen, anyone can be anything, and sometimes what waits beyond the pixels is deadly. Canada in 2012 was a country connected more than ever by technology. Social media platforms were booming, and online forums and chat rooms gave teenagers and young adults the chance to experiment with identity in ways previous generations never could. For many, it was harmless fun creating avatars, role-playing, or exaggerating achievements. But for one young man in Ontario, the line between fantasy and reality blurred so dangerously that it ended in murder. The case that would later be called the Catfish Murder exposed not only the fragility of trust online, but also the explosive consequences of deception. 19-year-old. Jordan Rivers was like many young men of his age, curious, hopeful, searching for love and validation in a digital world. He was shy in person, the kind of boy who struggled to talk to girls in real life, but online he was confident. That confidence grew when he met Stephanie, a girl who appeared to be around his age with long brown hair and a soft, inviting smile. Stephanie was funny, attentive, and told Jordan she liked him in ways that made him feel seen. Their late-night chats grew into long conversations about life, music, and dreams. For Jordan, it was intoxicating, but Stephanie was not real. Behind the profile was a 22-year-old man named Matthew Kane, a socially isolated individual who had created the fake account not just for amusement, but to manipulate and control. Matthew had stolen photographs from a young woman's public profile, carefully curating a digital persona that seemed authentic. He told Jordan that Stephanie was shy, that she preferred to keep their relationship private, and that she didn't want a video chat because of technical issues. Jordan, desperate to believe, accepted the excuses. Over time, Jordan fell deeply in love with the girl he thought was Stephanie. He confided his insecurities, shared personal secrets, and even began to withdraw from real-life friends. To him, this was more than a crush, it was a relationship, the kind that made him imagine a future together. He spoke about meeting her, about introducing her to his family, about the life they could build. The fantasy might have continued indefinitely, But eventually, Jordan grew suspicious. He pressed harder for proof, for a real meeting. Under pressure, Matthew panicked. The web of lies he had spun for months was beginning to unravel. Rather than reveal the truth, he doubled down, weaving stories of illness, family crises, and excuses that only heightened Jordan's confusion. But Jordan, by then, had invested too much of himself. When Matthew finally agreed to meet in person, Jordan was nervous but hopeful. He imagined holding Stephanie's hand, confirming the connection he had felt all along. What Jordan did not expect was that Stephanie would turn out to be Matthew himself. The meeting, arranged in a quiet area near Matthew's apartment, was the moment of revelation. Jordan arrived with anticipation, scanning the area for a young woman. Instead, Matthew appeared anxious, jittery, and holding a look that betrayed both guilt and obsession. Jordan's realization was immediate and devastating. The girl he had loved did not exist. Witnesses later testified that the confrontation escalated quickly. Jordan shouted at Matthew, demanding to know why he had been lied to, why he had been manipulated for months. To Jordan, it was humiliation and betrayal of the deepest kind. To Matthew, it was exposure, the collapse of the fragile fantasy world he had constructed. Rage overtook him. Instead of apologizing or walking away, Matthew lashed out violently. He pulled Jordan into an alley, and in a frenzy of anger and desperation, he beat and strangled him. Jordan never had a chance to fight back. When Jordan's body was discovered hours later, discarded and broken, police quickly began piecing together his last known activities. His phone revealed a string of messages arranging the meeting with Stephanie. Investigators followed the trail and soon realized the account was fabricated. Digital forensics pointed to Matthew's apartment. Within days, he was arrested. The confession that followed stunned even experienced detectives. Matthew admitted he had been posing as Stephanie for months, claiming it began as a joke but spiraled into something more. He said he enjoyed the power of making someone fall in love with a lie. But when Jordan pushed for the truth, Matthew felt cornered, exposed, and incapable of facing the humiliation. His solution, in his distorted mind, was to silence Jordan forever. The trial drew intense media coverage. Journalists dubbed it the catfish murder, and the story spread across Canada and beyond. For many, it was the first time they had heard the term catfishing, the act of creating a false online identity to deceive someone. The public was horrified not only by the murder itself, but by the realization that anyone could so easily construct a fake persona online, leading someone else into a spiral of love, lies, and danger. In court, Matthew's defense tried to argue diminished responsibility, pointing to his social isolation and psychological struggles. But the jury was unmoved. The brutality of the act, combined with the deliberate deception that preceded it, painted a picture of premeditation and cruelty. Matthew Kane was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for at least 15 years. For Jordan's family, the loss was immeasurable. They remembered him as a gentle, trusting young man who wanted nothing more than to be loved. His parents spoke about the pain of knowing their son's last moments were filled with confusion and betrayal. His friends described him as someone who had always been there for others, never expecting that his openness and kindness would make him a target. The case sparked national debate in Canada about online safety and the psychological dangers of digital deception. Advocacy groups began pushing for greater awareness. Schools incorporated lessons about online identity into their curricula, and law enforcement started training officers to recognize patterns of catfishing-related crimes. The message was clear. Behind every profile picture could be a stranger, and sometimes that stranger could be deadly. Today, the story of the catfish murder continues to resonate. It stands as a grim reminder that the internet, while offering endless opportunities for connection, is also a space where predators and manipulators thrive. For Jordan, the price of trust was his life. For the world, his story became a warning that love online can be not just fragile, but fatal. By 2016, WeChat had become more than a messaging app in China. It was a universe of its own. People used it not only to talk, but also to shop, pay bills, order food, and for many young people, to meet potential partners. The platform's convenience and popularity made it fertile ground for connection, but also for exploitation. That year, one of the most chilling stories of love and betrayal unfolded. A crime that would be remembered as the WeChat love crime. The victim was 21-year-old Lin Xia, a university student in Wuhan. Bright, ambitious, and the first in her family to attend college, she carried the hopes of her parents, who worked tirelessly in a textile factory to support her education. Lin was known for her kindness and optimism, though her friends often teased her about being a little too trusting. She had always believed that love, like in the dramas she adored, would one day sweep into her life unexpectedly. Her chance seemed to come through WeChat. Late one evening, she received a friend request from someone named Jiang Wei. His profile showed him as a polished, confident young man in his late 20s. He claimed to be a successful entrepreneur in Guangzhou, someone who traveled often for business but longed for companionship. His photos, designer suits, luxury cars, a smile framed by expensive restaurants, painted the picture of a man who had everything except love. Lin was flattered. At first, she was cautious, answering his messages with polite formality. But Jiang was patient and persistent. He complimented her intelligence, admired her dedication to her studies, and told her she had the kind of warmth and beauty that money could not buy. Over weeks, their conversations grew longer, stretching late into the night. He promised her a future filled with stability and adventure. For Lin, who dreamed of more than the narrow streets of her hometown, Jiang's attention was intoxicating. As the relationship deepened, Jiang began asking for photos, at first innocent, then increasingly intimate. He assured her that he cherished her trust, and that their bond was unique, unshakable. Hesitant but convinced of his sincerity, Lin complied. In her mind, this was a step toward the marriage he often spoke about. She believed she was sharing her soul with someone who would one day be her husband. The illusion shattered when Jiang's messages took a darker turn. One evening, he told her he needed money urgently to cover a temporary debt, promising to repay her as soon as possible. When she refused, explaining that she was only a student, he revealed his true nature. He had saved every intimate photo she had sent and threatened to release them online if she did not comply. Lin's world collapsed. In China, where reputation and family honor hold immense weight, the threat of such exposure was devastating. Terrified, she begged him to delete the photos. Jiang laughed, sending her edited images as proof of what he could do. He demanded she transfer money through WeChat Pay. Out of fear, Lin scraped together her savings and borrowed from friends, sending him what she could. But the demands only escalated. Finally, unable to bear the torment, Lin told Jiang she was going to the police. That single act sealed her fate. Jiang, fearing exposure and arrest, lured her into a meeting under the pretense of returning her photos. He promised her it would all end, that they could start fresh. Still clinging to a sliver of hope, Lin agreed. Meeting place was an isolated apartment on the outskirts of Wuhan. What transpired inside was later reconstructed from forensic evidence and Jiang's eventual confession. Lin arrived nervous but determined. She demanded her photos back, her voice trembling. Jiang, cornered by his own lies and greed, snapped. In a fit of rage, he assaulted her, strangling her until her body went limp. He left her lifeless form in the room and fled, believing he had silenced the problem forever. When Lin failed to return to her dormitory, her friends alerted the authorities. Investigators quickly traced her last messages, which led directly to Jiang. He had not been as careful as he thought. Surveillance footage showed Lin entering the apartment, but never leaving. Within days, Zhang was arrested while attempting to board a train out of the province. His arrest exposed the depth of his predation. Police discovered he had used multiple fake profiles to target young women, collecting intimate photos and extorting money. Lin was the only one who resisted openly, and the only one who paid with her life. The news of the murder spread rapidly across China. On Weibo and WeChat itself, hashtags about the case dominated conversations. The public was horrified not only by the brutality of the crime, but also by the ease with which Zhang had manipulated his victim. Parents everywhere warned their daughters about the dangers of trusting strangers online. Universities introduced emergency seminars on digital safety. For many young women, Lin's story became a chilling reminder of how easily affection could be turned into a weapon. The trial was swift. Zhang's defense tried to portray him as desperate and impulsive, a man who lost control in a moment of panic. But prosecutors revealed his long pattern of calculated deception, his deliberate use of technology to exploit and dominate. The court sentenced him to death, a verdict that was met with widespread approval. For Lin's grieving family, however, no punishment could restore the daughter they had lost. The WeChat love crime became more than just a case. It became a turning point. The government launched new crackdowns on online scams and blackmail rings. WeChat introduced stricter security measures and urged users to be vigilant. Campaigns against digital extortion were broadcast on television, warning young people not to share intimate images and to report suspicious behavior immediately. For Lin, the tragedy was that she had believed in love. She had believed that behind the glowing screen was a man who saw her worth. Instead, she encountered a predator who used her trust as a weapon. Her story became a national cautionary tale, a reminder that in the digital age, love can be a mask, and sometimes, behind the mask lies not romance, but ruin. In 2011, the United States was in the midst of a dating revolution. Online platforms like Match.com allowed millions of Americans to search for love from the comfort of their homes, bridging distances that once would have been insurmountable. For many, the promise was genuine, a convenient way to meet someone who shared your values, your interests, your hopes. But for one divorced woman named Sarah Thompson, that promise turned into a nightmare that would end her life and shake the nation's perception of online dating forever. Sarah was 38 years old, recently divorced, and determined to start over. She was intelligent, professional, and independent, with a career in marketing that she loved. Yet after the end of her marriage, she felt a void, a longing for companionship and intimacy. Encouraged by friends, she created a profile on Match.com. Her photos were recent and tasteful. Her biography detailed her love for travel, cooking, and weekend hikes. She was cautious but hopeful, believing that someone compatible was out there, somewhere in the vast network of profiles. It wasn't long before she received a message from a man named Daniel Reed. Daniel presented himself as a successful businessman, a man in his early 40s with a sophisticated taste and a charming smile. His profile featured carefully staged photos, him in tailored suits, at fine restaurants, on vacation in scenic locations. His words were polite, thoughtful, and immediately engaging. Over days and weeks, he messaged her frequently, discussing mutual interests, recommending books, and sharing stories from his travels. Sarah was impressed. Unlike many suitors, Daniel seemed genuinely interested in her mind and heart. As their digital correspondence evolved into late-night phone calls and text messages, Sarah began to feel a connection that went beyond mere attraction. Daniel spoke of wanting a serious relationship, of meeting her family one day, of building a life together. He seemed stable, dependable, and sophisticated, the kind of man she had hoped to find after her divorce. She confided in him, laughed at his humor, and allowed herself to imagine a future in which she was loved and appreciated. Eventually, Daniel suggested they meet in person. He chose a small, upscale cafe near her neighborhood, citing the need for privacy and discretion. Sarah, nervous but thrilled, agreed. She dressed carefully that morning, feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety as she prepared for a date she believed could change her life. She told herself to trust her instincts. After all, they had built a rapport over weeks, a foundation she felt was solid, but the man who appeared in person was not the man she had come to know. Daniel Reed was in reality 39-year-old Mark Collins, a man with a criminal history that included theft, fraud, and stalking. He had no legitimate business, no stable lifestyle, and no sincere intentions. His entire online persona was fabricated to lure women into situations he could control. When Sarah saw him, she hesitated, sensing discrepancies between the man before her and the image she had grown attached to. The encounter quickly turned sinister. Collins became impatient when Sarah asked questions about his life and background. She noticed inconsistencies in his stories, his eyes darting nervously as he tried to maintain the illusion. When she mentioned her hesitation, he grew agitated. For Collins, the situation was spiraling beyond his control. The man he had created online, a charming, successful Daniel, could not be allowed to crumble in front of her. The fantasy of power, control, and deception had to be preserved, and he chose violence as the solution. Later investigations revealed that Sarah was murdered within hours of their first meeting. She was strangled in a rented apartment that Collins had chosen under the guise of privacy, her body later disposed of in a nearby wooded area. The murder was calculated, and forensic evidence suggested that Collins had premeditated how to lure his victims and cover his tracks. When Sarah failed to return home, her family and friends were frantic. Police quickly traced her communications, discovering the Match.com messages and text exchanges that led them to Collins. The discovery of his real identity sent shockwaves through the local community and eventually across the country. For investigators, the case underscored the dark potential of online dating. What seemed safe and convenient could, in the wrong hands, become deadly. Media coverage of the Match.com killer was intense. Journalists highlighted the way Collins had used charm and technology to manipulate Sarah's trust, emphasizing the vulnerability of divorced or single individuals seeking companionship online. The story sparked nationwide discussions about the safety of dating apps, particularly regarding background checks, verification processes, and the potential for deception. Match.com, facing scrutiny and criticism, pledged to improve user safety and reporting mechanisms. During the trial, evidence revealed Collins' pattern of predation. Police found multiple accounts he had created to lure other women, along with digital correspondence showing his manipulative tactics. His defense tried to claim that the murder had been impulsive, a momentary loss of control, but the jury was unmoved. The prosecution highlighted his deliberate planning, the fabrication of his online persona, and his exploitation of trust. Collins was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sarah's family was left devastated. Her parents spoke publicly about the young woman they had lost, intelligent, loving, and full of life. Taken from the world not by chance, but by a predator who preyed on her hope for love. Friends mourned the fact that a woman searching for companionship and connection had been met with deceit and violence instead. The case became a cautionary tale for millions of online daters. It highlighted how easily trust can be weaponized, and how the anonymity and reach of the internet can be used to exploit human vulnerability. Safety campaigns proliferated, advising individuals to verify identities, meet in public spaces, and stay alert for red flags that might indicate deceit. Years later, Sarah's story remains a stark reminder that the promise of love online is intertwined with risk. The Match.com killer case illustrates the fragility of trust, the consequences of deception, and the dangerous intersections between technology and human desire. For Sarah, what began as hope and optimism ended in tragedy, a life cut short by the very medium that promised connection. Her death is remembered not only as a personal loss, but as a warning. In the age of online romance, charm and smiles on a screen can mask deadly intentions. In 2019, Vietnam was witnessing a surge in social media usage, with platforms like Zalo dominating the landscape. For millions of users, Zalo was a space for messaging, sharing life updates, and meeting new people. But for some, the lines between genuine connection and danger blurred in ways that would turn dreams of romance into nightmares. One such story, the Zalo love trap, would shock the nation and serve as a chilling reminder of how digital trust could be weaponized. The victim was 23-year-old Mai Lin, a recent university graduate from Hanoi. Bright, ambitious, and caring, she had just started her first full-time job at a marketing firm. Mai Lin's friends described her as cheerful and optimistic, someone who trusted easily and believed in the kindness of others. While she had experienced a few failed relationships, she still held on to the hope of finding a partner who was serious, dependable, and loving. Her journey into danger began with a simple Zalo friend request from a man named Hugh. His profile depicted a tall, professional-looking man in his early 30s, always dressed smartly and with a confident smile. He claimed to be an entrepreneur who traveled frequently for work and sought a meaningful relationship. Hugh's charm was immediate and intoxicating. In their initial messages, he complimented Mai Lin on her intelligence, her smile, and her ambition, drawing her in with words that felt personal, sincere, and rare. Over the following months, their conversations became a nightly ritual. Hugh praised her for her accomplishments, empathized with her work frustrations, and shared stories of his own life carefully curated to appear successful and stable. He sent photos of a luxurious lifestyle, dinners at fine restaurants, and images from international trips. Mai Lin, impressed and enamored, allowed herself to dream of a future with him. She confided in him her fears, ambitions, and even personal secrets, believing she had found someone who truly understood her. The relationship deepened when Hugh suggested moving beyond chat. He asked for private photos, assuring her they were safe and that he would cherish them. Hesitant at first, Mai Lin eventually complied, trusting the man she believed loved her. This trust would soon become a weapon. Months into the relationship, Hugh began to subtly manipulate her. He claimed to have debts, medical expenses, and business emergencies, painting himself as a man trapped by circumstance, but in need of her support. When Mai Lin expressed concern but refused to send money, the tone changed. Threats followed, often veiled in emotional appeals. He hinted that if she didn't comply, their relationship and the intimate photos she had shared could be exposed. She felt trapped, torn between fear, guilt, and lingering hope that he truly cared. Finally, Mai Lin decided she could no longer endure the pressure. She told him she wanted to meet in person to resolve everything and, if necessary, end the relationship. She hoped the meeting would be straightforward, a way to reclaim her autonomy and perhaps persuade Hugh to stop the manipulation. She did not anticipate that this step would seal her fate. The meeting was arranged in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Hanoi. Mai Lin arrived, cautious but determined, prepared to confront the man she had trusted for so long. Hugh, however, had a different plan. Reports from neighbors later described seeing a confrontation escalate rapidly. Words were exchanged, voices rose, and in the confined space of a small apartment, the situation turned violent. Mai Lin struggled, trying to escape, but Hugh overpowered her. In a horrific act of rage and calculation, he murdered her, leaving her body to conceal the evidence of his crime. Authorities were alerted when Mai Lin's family could not reach her. Her mother, a woman who had worked tirelessly to support her only daughter, grew frantic when repeated calls went unanswered. Friends described her as responsible and careful. Her sudden disappearance was alarming. Police quickly traced her communications. On Zalo, revealing the months of manipulation, the exchange of private images, and the arranged meeting. Hugh's trail led straight to him, and within days, he was apprehended while attempting to flee the city. The investigation revealed that Hugh had no legitimate business and a history of exploiting women for financial gain and emotional control. Mai Lin's case was the most extreme, culminating in murder when he feared exposure. Police also discovered he had targeted other women with similar tactics, though none had escalated to violence. The pattern was chilling: meticulous deception, manipulation, and a growing sense of entitlement that eventually led to fatal consequences. The case ignited national outrage. Newspapers and online forums dissected every detail of the crime, highlighting the dangers of online romance and the ease with which predators could manipulate trust through social media. Friends and family mourned Mai Lin not only as a victim of a horrific act, but as a young woman whose optimism and trust had been weaponized. Schools and organizations began warning young people about the potential dangers of sharing personal information and intimate images online. During the trial, Hugh showed no remorse. He attempted to justify his actions as a desperate response to potential exposure, but prosecutors painted a starkly different picture: a man who preyed on vulnerability, who had meticulously constructed lies, and who ended a young woman's life to maintain control. He was convicted and sentenced to death, with the court emphasizing the premeditation and cruelty involved. The Zalo love trap became a cautionary tale for Vietnam. It was a grim reminder that the allure of digital romance could hide devastating risks. Mai Lin's story highlighted the vulnerabilities of young people navigating online relationships, the dangers of emotional manipulation, and the terrifying potential for such encounters to escalate into violence. Her death was not just a personal tragedy, it was a societal warning that trust, once exploited in the digital age, could have fatal consequences. Years later, Mai Lin is remembered through awareness campaigns, safety seminars, and media reports. Her story serves as a painful reminder that love on social media is not always what it seems. The Zalo love trap was not only a murder, it was a mirror reflecting the hidden dangers behind every seemingly innocent profile, every flattering message, and every virtual promise. In 2015, online dating in the United States had reached a level of mainstream acceptance. Apps like OkCupid allowed people to meet potential partners with the swipe of a finger or a click of a mouse, promising romance for those who were willing to navigate the digital landscape. But for 30-year-old Vanessa Miller, a graphic designer living in Portland, Oregon, her quest for companionship would take a terrifying turn, culminating in a tragedy that would haunt her family and the city for years. Vanessa was intelligent, independent, and creative, with a vibrant social life and a close-knit circle of friends. Yet after a string of failed relationships, she decided to try online dating. She created a profile on OkCupid, sharing carefully selected photos and brief biography emphasizing her love for art, hiking, and meaningful conversation. She wanted a partner who was kind, attentive, and genuine, a person who would appreciate her for who she was. It wasn't long before she received a message from a man named Daniel Harris. His profile presented him as 34, a software engineer with a stable career and an interest in outdoor adventures. His messages were thoughtful, humorous, and deeply flattering. He seemed to listen attentively, asking questions about her life and opinions, remembering small details she had mentioned in previous conversations. Vanessa was intrigued, and over the weeks, she and Daniel exchanged long messages and phone calls. He often called late at night, making her feel special, desired, and connected in a way she hadn't felt in years. At first, everything seemed ideal. Daniel spoke about future dates, hiking trips, and shared dreams of building a life together. He sent photos of himself in various locations around Portland and appeared genuinely invested in getting to know her. Vanessa, cautiously optimistic, allowed herself to believe that she had found someone trustworthy, someone who could finally be a true partner. However, as their interactions intensified, subtle red flags began to appear. Daniel wanted to know where she was at all times, asking for constant updates. He would become frustrated if she didn't respond quickly, or if she spent time with friends without him. He sent repeated messages late at night, sometimes multiple times an hour. Vanessa initially dismissed these behaviors, attributing them to his enthusiasm or eagerness. But over time, the obsessive nature of his attention became harder to ignore. Vanessa decided to slow down and re-establish boundaries. Daniel's behavior escalated. He began sending menacing messages, hinting that he could not tolerate being ignored. The intensity of his obsession made Vanessa increasingly uneasy. She tried to distance herself, hoping he would respect her decision, but instead, his messages grew darker, filled with anger and threats. It became clear that his attachment had crossed into a dangerous fixation. Fearing escalation, Vanessa initially considered involving the authorities, but she hoped it could be resolved without public exposure. Tragically, her attempts to disengage only intensified Daniel's obsession. One evening, after a particularly tense exchange, he tracked her location and appeared at her apartment. Surveillance footage and witness accounts later revealed that he had been following her, learning her routines, and waiting for the perfect moment. The confrontation inside her home was swift and brutal. Daniel demanded that she resume contact, that she acknowledge his love and obey his expectations. Vanessa refused, asserting her independence and rejecting his control. In response, Daniel attacked her, a violent outburst fueled by obsession and rage. By the time authorities arrived, Vanessa had been killed, her life extinguished by a man she had once trusted, a man she had met through a platform designed to foster connection, not fear. News of the murder spread rapidly through Portland. Beyond, the media dubbed it the OkCupid stalker case, highlighting the terrifying consequences of online obsession. For many, it was a chilling reminder that digital romance, while convenient and promising, could mask deadly intentions. Friends and family mourned Vanessa not just for the loss of a loved one, but for the betrayal of trust that had led to her death. The investigation quickly focused on Daniel. Police discovered a disturbing pattern. He had a history of fixating on women he met online, tracking their locations, and issuing threats when faced with rejection. His social media activity, phone records, and digital footprints revealed months of stalking and manipulation. It became clear that Vanessa's murder was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of a dangerous behavioral pattern. During the Potter trial, prosecutors painted a detailed picture of Daniel's obsession and the deliberate steps he had taken to control and intimidate Vanessa. His defense attempted to portray the crime as impulsive, claiming temporary loss of control, but the evidence of planning and prior threats convinced the jury otherwise. Daniel Harris was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Vanessa's death sparked national conversations about the risks of online dating, the importance of recognizing red flags, and the need for safety measures when meeting digital acquaintances in real life. Dating platforms faced scrutiny, and many introduced features to alert users to potentially dangerous behavior, including location privacy tools, reporting mechanisms, and educational campaigns on stalking and harassment. Her family, while devastated, worked to honor her memory by raising awareness about online safety. They emphasized the importance of trusting one's instincts, setting firm boundaries, and taking threats seriously. Friends shared stories of Vanessa's warmth, creativity, and kindness, remembering her as someone who sought connection and love, only to encounter cruelty disguised as affection. The OkCupid stalker case remains A stark reminder that the intersection of technology and human desire can be deadly. It demonstrates that charm and attentiveness online may mask obsession, manipulation, and violence. For Vanessa, what began as hope and curiosity ended in tragedy, highlighting the vulnerabilities inherent in digital connections. Her story is not only a cautionary tale for individuals navigating online romance, but also a societal warning. The digital world, while offering endless possibilities for love, can also harbor hidden dangers capable of devastating real lives. In 2018, Russia's online dating scene was booming, with platforms like Badoo offering millions of users the promise of romance, friendship, and connection. The app's popularity was especially high among young adults seeking companionship. In cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg, but for 24-year-old Anastasia Volkova, a marketing student from Yekaterinburg, the promise of love through Badoo became a nightmare, ending in tragedy that shocked the nation and highlighted the dangers lurking behind digital screens. Anastasia was ambitious, lively, and outgoing. She loved spending time with friends, attending cultural events, and exploring the vibrant nightlife of her city. Though her parents worried about her online activities, they trusted her judgment and independence. Like many of her peers, she joined Badoo seeking connection, a meaningful relationship that could bring joy and companionship into her life. Shortly after creating her profile, Anastasia began chatting with a man named Igor Petrov. His profile presented him as a charming, successful businessman in his early 30s, living in Moscow. His photos depicted a life of wealth and sophistication, suits, luxury cars, exotic vacations. Igor's messages were polite, attentive, and flattering. He complimented her looks, her intelligence, and her vivacious personality, and he quickly gained her trust through daily conversations that extended late into the night. Over weeks of chatting, Igor's words became increasingly persuasive. He shared stories of business trips, dinners at exclusive restaurants, and aspirations that painted him as the perfect partner. Anastasia, enchanted by his sophistication and apparent stability, allowed herself to dream of meeting him. They spoke about traveling together, attending events, and even settling in the capital once she graduated. For her, the digital relationship felt real, intimate, and deeply promising. However, Igor was not who he claimed to be. In reality, he was 35-year-old Viktor Kuznetsov, a man with a criminal history that included fraud, theft, and blackmail. He had no business, no luxury lifestyle, and no intention of forming a genuine relationship. His persona was a carefully constructed deception, designed to manipulate and control his victims. Through months of charm and false intimacy, he had groomed Anastasia to trust him implicitly, sharing personal details and private photos. Eventually, Victor began to escalate his manipulation. He requested money under various pretenses, business emergencies, debts, or investment opportunities. When Anastasia expressed hesitation or refused, he threatened to expose the intimate photos she had shared. Initially frightened, she tried to comply partially, sending small amounts, hoping it would satisfy him and preserve their relationship. But the demands intensified, and Victor's patience waned. Any hint of resistance from Anastasia became intolerable. The situation reached a breaking point when Anastasia, determined to reclaim her autonomy, told Victor she would no longer send money and intended to cut ties with him. She hoped that by confronting him or ceasing communication, she could regain control of her life. Victor, however, perceived her refusal as betrayal, humiliation, and a threat to his carefully constructed facade. In his mind, if Anastasia would not comply, no one else could possess her. The situation, which had been virtual, now demanded a deadly solution. Victor arranged to meet Anastasia under the pretense of resolving their issues and returning her photos. The meeting was set at a rented apartment in a quiet area of Yekaterinburg. Anastasia arrived, nervous but believing she could negotiate, retrieve her property, and end the relationship safely. Victor, however, had planned the encounter as a trap. Once she entered, he confronted her aggressively, demanding submission and compliance. When she resisted, he attacked her with brutal force. By the time the authorities arrived, Anastasia had been strangled and her body concealed within the apartment. The crime was shocking in its cold calculation. Evidence suggested Victor had been prepared to silence her from the moment she defied him. Surveillance footage, phone records, and chat logs quickly led police to Victor, who attempted to flee the city but was apprehended while boarding a train. During the investigation, it became clear that Victor had used Badu to target multiple women, manipulating them with false identities, intimacy, and coercion. Anastasia had been the only victim to resist his demands fully, and she paid the ultimate price. Police described his behavior as a pattern of calculated predation, exploiting the anonymity of online platforms to gain control over vulnerable individuals. The Badu murder captured national attention. News outlets detailed the months of deception, the grooming process, and the eventual deadly confrontation. Social media users shared warnings about online predators, discussing how carefully crafted profiles could mask dangerous intentions. Universities and organizations held seminars on digital safety, emphasizing the importance of verifying identities, limiting personal information, and never yielding to threats of exposure or blackmail. At Victor's trial, prosecutors presented extensive evidence, including chat histories, photographs, and testimonies from friends and family. They argued that his actions were deliberate and premeditated, highlighting the months of planning and psychological manipulation. His defense attempted to claim impulsivity and loss of control, but the jury found him guilty of premeditated murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a verdict meant to serve as both punishment and deterrent. Anastasia's family was devastated, grappling not only with grief, but with the betrayal of trust that had led to her death. Friends remembered her as vibrant and kind-hearted, mourning the fact that her hope for love had been exploited by a predator. Her story served as a sobering reminder that even in an age of digital connection, human vulnerability could be weaponized, and the search for love could intersect with danger in the most tragic ways. The Badu murder remains a cautionary tale. In Russia, a warning about the potential perils of online dating. Anastasia's tragedy illustrates that charm, attention, and perceived intimacy on a screen can mask deadly intentions, and that trust placed in the digital world can be exploited with devastating consequences. Her story is remembered not only as a personal loss, but as a national call to awareness. In the pursuit of love online, vigilance and caution are not just advisable, they can be life-saving. In 2019, Tinder had become one of the most popular dating apps in the world, offering users the thrill of connection with a simple swipe. For many, it was a platform of casual encounters, or the first step towards serious relationships. But for 25-year-old Emily Carter, a young professional from Sydney, Australia, what began as a hopeful attempt at finding romance would spiral into a terrifying nightmare that would leave a city and her family-grieving. Emily was intelligent, independent, and full of life. She had recently started a career in public relations, had a tight-knit group of friends, and enjoyed the vibrant culture of Sydney. While cautious about online dating, she was curious about meeting new people, especially those she might never encounter in her everyday routine. Encouraged by friends and intrigued by the possibilities, she created a Tinder profile. Her photos were bright and cheerful, and her bio emphasized her love of art, travel, and meaningful conversation. It wasn't long before she matched with a man named Luke Thompson. His profile portrayed him as handsome, athletic, and charismatic, with images of a sun-soaked lifestyle, surfing, fine dining, and exotic vacations. His messages were polite, witty, and engaging, Luke praised her looks and personality, complimented her interests, and quickly created a sense of intimacy through thoughtful, late-night conversations. Emily found herself enjoying the attention, feeling a connection she hadn't expected from a casual swipe. Over weeks, their conversations deepened. Luke shared stories of his adventurous life, painting himself as independent, charming, and successful. He expressed interest in Emily's passions and ambitions, always listening attentively and remembering small details she had shared. To Emily, he seemed like the ideal partner, exciting yet considerate, strong yet gentle. Their interactions became the highlight of her days, and she allowed herself to imagine a real-life meeting that could solidify the connection they had built online. Eventually, Luke suggested they meet in person. He recommended an apartment he had supposedly rented for a weekend, presenting it as a private and romantic space where they could enjoy each other's company safely. Emily, cautiously optimistic and trusting her instincts, agreed. She told a friend she was meeting someone from Tinder and arranged to check in by text throughout the evening. In her mind, this was the natural next step in a budding relationship. However, the man she met was not the charming, adventurous Luke she had known online. His real identity was Liam Harris, a 28-year-old with a history of substance abuse and violent behavior. The polished photos and curated persona had been nothing more than a mask. Harris had no legitimate work, no stable life, and a dangerous propensity for aggression. His online charm was a calculated trap designed to lure unsuspecting women into vulnerable situations. When Emily arrived at the apartment, Harris's demeanor immediately raised alarms. His behavior was erratic, alternating between flirtatious and controlling, and it soon became clear that he was under the influence of drugs. Despite initial reassurances, Emily sensed danger and attempted to leave. Harris's reaction was swift and violent. Witnesses later described the confrontation escalating within minutes, with Emily struggling to escape as Harris physically overpowered her. In a terrifying act of rage and control, he murdered her, leaving her body hidden inside a large suitcase in the apartment. The tragedy unfolded further when Harris attempted to flee, but he was apprehended by authorities shortly after. A neighbor reported suspicious activity. Police discovered the apartment filled with evidence of his violent tendencies, along with multiple devices documenting conversations and interactions with other women. While Emily was his only known victim to face lethal violence, the investigation revealed a disturbing pattern of coercion, manipulation, and substance-fueled aggression. The Tinder horror date case dominated Australian media. Coverage emphasized the dangers of online dating, particularly the risks of meeting strangers in private settings without proper safety measures. Psychologists and digital safety experts spoke publicly about the importance of verifying identities, meeting in public spaces, informing friends or family, and watching for signs of deception or instability. Social media buzzed with discussions about the vulnerabilities women face when seeking connection online. During the trial, prosecutors presented a chilling portrait of Harris. They described months of careful manipulation, the construction of a false persona, and the deliberate planning that culminated in Emily's murder. His defense attempted to minimize responsibility, citing drug influence and a momentary loss of control, but the jury found the premeditation and brutality overwhelming. Harris was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, a verdict that offered some measure of justice but could never restore Emily's life. Emily's family and friends were left shattered. Her parents described her as vivacious, caring, and full of dreams, a young woman whose optimism and trust had been exploited. Friends mourned not only her death, but the cruel betrayal of a person she had trusted and allowed into her life. Community vigils were held in her memory, and her story became a catalyst for broader public awareness. Campaigns about online dating safety, the Tinder horror date remains a stark reminder of the hidden dangers lurking behind digital romance. It illustrates how easily charm, attention, and curated personas can mask violent intentions, and how quickly a promising encounter can turn deadly. Emily's story is remembered not only as a personal tragedy, but as a societal warning. In the digital age, even the most promising connections carry risks, and vigilance, caution, and self-protection are essential for anyone navigating the world of online dating. Her death serves as a painful lesson that behind the excitement of a swipe or a message could lie someone capable of unspeakable violence. The Tinder horror date is more than a case, it is a mirror reflecting the vulnerabilities inherent in seeking love online and the potential consequences when trust meets deception.
Thank you for following.